Hi, welcome to the Taps family. My name's Liz, and we're going to get to talk about wine today because wine is really fun. A lot of people can sometimes feel really intimidated by wine lists if they've never worked with wine extensively before. And my goal is to make you feel as comfortable as humanly possible with our wine list and to really make you feel like you can handle this and to have some fun in doing it and learn something new today. So if everybody has their packet that they were sent, we're going to be going through the packet together. Um, the very first portion is a brief history of wine. Please feel free to read it. Wine started forever ago, right? We've been making wine for thousands and thousands of years, and it's progressed as technology has progressed. So there's a lot of really cool information in here about the history of wine. You don't have to know it, but if you find that knowing the background on stuff makes you feel more comfortable, please read it. We're going to really move forward, and we're going to start with wine vocabulary, because we've all heard wine snobs sit here and talk with different words that we've never even heard before, and you're like, I don't even know what they want. So we're going to start with the vocabulary. I'm going to go through some of that, the things you need to know, the things you don't need to know. All right, so we're going to start with the first vocab word on your list, which is acidity. And acidity is in all wines. It's what makes a wine balanced. Just like a cocktail is always going to have some form of lime or lemon or grapefruit juice, a wine always has a level of acidity to it. It's what keeps everything in balance. And it's what produces this sharpness taste, and it makes your mouth water. When your mouth waters, you want to eat food. So you'll have some guests who say, I want a really high acid wine. Like, great. We're going to lean towards certain varietals, which are going to be your Sauvignon Blancs and your Rieslings. And we'll go over a lot of that when we actually go through each wine individually, especially the wines on our Wines by the Glass list. But no, the best way to think about wines with high acid is to think about squeezing a lemon onto food. So if you would squeeze a lemon onto that, you would want to pair a high acid wine. Think about fish and chips, calamari fritti. You want to squeeze a lemon? You're going to put a high acid wine. A ribeye steak? Probably not. If that's what the guest wants, we're going to do it. But if you're thinking about pairing, the best way to think about acidity is squeezing a lemon onto the food. So aftertaste. Aftertaste is also called the finish, and that's the flavor that lingers in your mouth as, after you've swallowed. Think about the same way coffee lingers in your mouth and you can still taste it even after you've swallowed. That's aftertaste. That's the finish. That's what guests are talking about when they say they want something with a long finish. They want a flavor that lingers. Appellation. It's the name of a viticultural area. It's where the grapes are grown. It could be as big as the United States or California, and it can be as small as a single vineyard within a larger place. So, let's talk about Napa, and then it gets smaller to Oakville, and then it gets smaller to an individual vineyard, but it could be as big as California. It's just where the grapes were grown. Aroma. There are 3 different things in here that talk about the smell of the wine. And realistically, your guests are going to use them all interchangeably, and they don't know the difference between them. So just know aroma is talking about how the wine smells. Balance. A wine needs to be in balance. You don't want it to be too acidic. You don't want it to be too tannic. Just like you don't want a cocktail to be out of balance. You don't want your wine to be out of balance. You're safe because all of the wines that we purchase are in balance. So it's not really something you have to worry too much about. Barrel fermentation. So when you make wine, you have a choice on how you're going to age it, just like we do with beer. When you barrel ferment a beer, it gives a different flavor. When you barrel ferment a wine, it changes the flavor of the wine as well. It mostly comes in context when you're talking about white wines, specifically Chardonnay. Red wines are almost all exclusively barrel fermented, so you don't really need to know too much about it on that side. The flavors that you get from barrel fermenting on red wines tend to be coffee and that oakiness that people talk about. On white wines, it gives a little bit more roundness to the flavor. It also can bring in slight flavors of like coconut or dill and even toasted bread. And once you get a chance to actually taste through some of the wines when you're here in person, it'll be a lot clearer than me just sitting here spouting information at you. Big. When a wine's big, it's big. Think about different levels of roasted coffee, right? You have a really dark roasted coffee, it it's bigger. It feels bigger in your palate. It tastes heavier. Wine does the same thing. A big wine's going to have higher alcohol. It's going to have more tannin, more acid, and just feel bigger in your palate. Which brings us to body, which is how heavy the wine is. The easiest way to talk about body is to talk about milk. Whole milk versus skim milk. They physically feel different in your mouth when you're drinking them. That's the difference between a light-bodied wine and a full-bodied wine. Bouquet, we're talking about the smell again. That's how the wine smells. Everybody smells the wine and they say like, ooh, I smell this and that. They're talking about the bouquet, they're talking about the aroma, they're talking about the nose. Brix, don't worry about it, nobody cares. Dry is technically the absence of sweetness in wine. And this is one of those words that people use a lot and they don't necessarily know what it means. So when it comes to white wine, if somebody's talking to you about they want a dry wine, they typically want a higher acid, less oak-aged wine. So think Sauvignon Blanc, think Pinot Grigio. Don't necessarily go towards your heavier, oakier Chardonnays, and definitely not towards your Riesling. As far as red wines, when somebody says they want dry, what they really want is a really tannic wine. So think Cabernet, think Merlot, as opposed to a Pinot, which has a little bit less tannin. Fruit. Fruit is the flavor that you get from the grapes as it ferments. Common misperception is that, when we talk about a wine and we say that there's a lot of cherry in this wine, there's never ever any cherry added to the wine. It's just flavors that become natural from the chemicals in the grape. You think about the difference between a Granny Smith apple and a Golden Delicious apple. They taste differently. Grapes do the same thing. So then when you make them into wine, they taste different. And your body and your brain and your tongue will automatically start trying to make these connections as to things they've had in the past. And so when we talk about fruit in a wine, just know that if there's a lot of cherry, it doesn't mean that it grew next to cherries, that there's cherries added. It's just a flavor that comes naturally from certain grapes through fermentation. Legs and tears, that's when somebody they swirl their little wine glass and they look at it and they're like, oh, look at the legs on this. They don't really mean anything. There's some scientific stuff going on that the thicker the legs are, the more alcohol, but there's also other scientists who say they don't. So really, if a guest sits there and twirls their wine glass and talks about ooh, look at the legs, yeah, this is some nice legs on it, it's a really great wine. Just agree with the guest, make them happy. Then they feel good about themselves, they feel confident about what they're saying, and they like you. Malolactic or secondary fermentation is important, and it is a complicated topic. Your guests are never going to ask you about malolactic fermentation. They're not going to ask you about secondary fermentation. They're not going to ask you about ML or anything like that. But what it does is it turns malic acid that occurs naturally into lactic acid, and lactose, like milk. So it gives you this buttery, sour, creamy flavor to a wine when a winemaker chooses to do this process. Most red wines go through it, and you have no idea about that. And that's fine. Nobody does. It doesn't matter because pretty much all of them do. On a white wine, it makes the difference between a buttery, oaky Chardonnay and a not buttery Chardonnay. And it's one of those flavors that people really like or they really hate. And so if you have somebody ask, they're going to ask you about, I want a buttery Chardonnay or I want an oaky Chardonnay. What they're talking about typically is this malolactic fermentation. And when we go through the wines, I will absolutely let you know which ones have that. Next up is the nose. We're talking about the smell again. Residual sugar is how much sugar is left in the wine. It's talking about sweetness. Your guests aren't going to ask you about residual sugar. They're just going to ask you, is the wine sweet? They're going to say they want a sweet wine. They're going to say they don't want a sweet wine. They're not going to use any of this technical jargon. Tannin is one of those things that people like to talk about. It occurs mostly in red wines, and it's that gritty feeling that makes it feels like your gums are almost itchy. And tannin occurs in other things too. It occurs in coffee. Coffee has a lot of tannin. Hot tea has a lot of tannin to it. So if you have ever tried to figure out what that feeling is in your mouth, that's tannin. Some grapes have more, some grapes have less. Some people like more, some people like less. And we'll go through our wines by the glass and which ones have a lot of tannin and which ones don't. Terroir. Terroir is that super fancy French word that people talk about. And it's really the difference between wine and a lot of other types of alcohol. When you make beer, if our brewers sit here and they've used the same recipe to create cream ale, they're going to make the same cream ale every time. Whether they brew at the brewery in Tustin, if they brew at Brea, Corona, Germany, wherever, they could brew the same recipe and get the same beer every single time. And wine's the total opposite. Wine depends on what the weather was like. So one vintage to the next, the weather's going to have a huge difference. Terroir talks about the weather. It talks about the climate. It talks about what side of the hill it was grown on and whether it was cloudy or not, and if Bob or Joe was the one who picked the dang grapes. That all comes down to terroir, and it's what is the defining feature of wine versus everything else. Varietal is your specific grape type. Again, think about your apples. The difference between a Granny Smith apple and a Golden Delicious apple is the same difference between a Pinot Noir and a Cabernet Sauvignon. They're just two different types of grapes that taste differently. And then varietal character, which to me, if you're just starting with wine, is probably the most important thing to learn. Varietal character is what each variety typically tastes like. So if you know that a Pinot Noir is light-bodied, has cherry, cola, and a touch of oak to it, you can talk about any Pinot Noir on our list and be right. So if a guest asks you, what's the difference between the complicated Pinot Noir and the St. Francis Merlot, you can tell them because you know that's what Pinot Noir tastes like. So instead of trying to learn the tasting notes of every single wine on our bottle list, if you learn the varietal character, you can learn the differences between the major wines. It's so much faster and easier. Next up is our wine categories, and these are very generic to the differences between red wine and white wines. So just bear in mind, with wine, there's always an asterisk. There's always some winemaker who's trying to do funky stuff, who's trying to do weird and wonderful and new things and push the envelope. So these are very much generalizations, but they'll give you a really good idea as to the difference between them. So as far as grapes, white wine comes from white grapes. Red wines come from red or black grapes. Totally makes sense. Color. So when you have a grape, in white wine, you press the juice and you immediately take all the skins off, right? You press the juice down, you let it go through a vat underneath so that it doesn't stay in contact with the skins. And that helps to keep the tannin level down, and it keeps the wine from getting colored, because sometimes a white grape might have a pinkish hue to it, and you don't want your wine to be pink. In a red grape, the color actually comes from the skins. So a winemaker might choose to let the juice rest with the skins still touching it for an extended amount of time to give a darker color to the wine. If they do it for a little less time, you're going to get a lighter color. And so that's winemaker choice. The process, we've kind of talked about this a little bit already. White wine, typically in either stainless steel or in barrels. Red wine, almost exclusively done in barrels. As far as flavor, I like to think of white wine as trees. So every white wine has some component of citrus to it, whether it's lime, lemon, grapefruit, all sorts of different stuff. There's always some form of citrus in a white wine. So you have your citrus trees. You have your orchard trees. So those are your apples and pears. And then you have, apples, pears, nectarines, peaches. All of that whole family you're going to find in white wines. Not all of them will be in every one, but each one will have some. And then the other category is going to be your tropical. And your tropical is your banana or guava or mango. So when you think about white wine, I think about trees. I think about what kind of citrus trees are there, what kind of orchard trees are there, what kind of tropical notes are there. And that's really where I talk about flavor in white wine. In red wine, I think in color. So there's always going to be red, blue, or black fruit. So your red fruit are going to be cherries, raspberries, red currant, even maybe red apple. Blue, you're thinking blueberries, huckleberries, plums. And then your black fruit are going to be your blackberries, your black currant, black cherries. So I always think about white wine in trees, red wine in colors. As far as rosé goes, rosé is typically made from red grapes. They press this juice off the skins like we talked about, but then they let them sit there for like just a little bit, and then they take the skin off, and that's what gives you this really pretty pink color. There are times when they take red wine and mix it with white wine, but those are few and far between. Typically, just know that rosé wine is made by making red wine and just not letting it really get colored by the grape skins. Next up is champagne and sparkling wine. And there's some really cool information in here about champagne and sparkling wine that you can go through. It's something that I find really interesting, but we don't really need to spend a lot of time on. I'm already throwing a lot of information at you. Just know that for champagne is expensive because in red and white wine, you ferment once. In champagne, you ferment twice, and it takes typically about twice as long, if not even longer, to make champagne. So the more times you have to go through a process and the longer it takes, the more it's going to cost. And then there's everybody loves champagne, so that helps drive the price up too. And then if you've never heard it before, there's been that line, all champagne is sparkling wine, but not all sparkling wine is champagne. The French, we all know the French, you can't call it champagne unless it's actually grown and produced in the Champagne region of France. Everywhere else is supposed to call it sparkling wine. You'll see rule breakers who call it California champagne, but unless it's actually grown in the Champagne region of France, it shouldn't be called champagne. Okay. There's some sparkling wine descriptions as well in your packet. Just know that all of ours we don't have a single Blanc de Noir. We do carry Blanc de Blancs, which are champagnes made exclusively from the Chardonnay grape. Dry is, again, the absence of sugar or sweetness. So when you say you want a dry champagne, they're looking for a not sweet champagne, as opposed to extra dry, which means extra sweet, because why not? Let's just make it complicated enough. And then Brut is also dry. So we only carry one sweet sparkling wine, and it's a Prosecco. So know that any other sparkling wine on our list that anybody asks about is going to be dry or Brut. The only one that has sweetness is the Prosecco, which most people will already know Prosecco is on the sweet side, so your guests should be fairly aware of what they're ordering. Next up, we're going to talk about port. And again, there's a lot of information in here on port that you don't really need to know. But I'm going to point out the highlights for you. Port is a dessert wine made in Portugal. Makes sense. We do not carry white or rosé port. We only carry tawny and ruby port. So a tawny port is tawny brown in color. And it's aged in barrels, which is what gives it this tawny brown color. And it's aged in increments of 10 years. So if you've ever heard somebody ask for a 20-year port, they're talking about a tawny port. And as far as flavor profiles, tawny ports, in my mind, have brown flavors. So their sweetness is caramel, creme brulee, hazelnuts, snickerdoodles. And when we talk about fruit, think more Dutch apple pie, those caramelized flavors. And then you have the other side, which is your ruby port, and those are not barrel aged. So they keep that really red color. And they can be either they're barrel aged for a short amount of time. Let me rephrase that. So your cheaper end ruby port is going to be barrel aged really quickly and then sold off. And then you have vintage ports, which are ruby ports. And those are the same thing. They're barrel aged for just a short amount of time. But then the winemaker will keep them and cellar them for long periods of times to give them their age. But they're still going to stay that dark red color as opposed to the more tawny brown color. As far as flavors, it's the same idea. The ruby ports are ruby red in color, and their flavors are more red in color. So think cherry pie, think candied apple, strawberry. So they're still sweet and dessert flavors, but they're more fruity flavors as opposed to the tawny ports, which are more of the sugary, hazelnut, caramely flavors. And those are the two differences between the two types of ports that we carry. Yes.
And action.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the tasting notes on each of the wines by the glass that we do. So we're going to start with our sparkling wines. We have the Domaine Chandon, which is coming from Napa Valley, and that's going to be slightly bigger bubbles and more Meyer lemony in flavor. Next is going to be the Nicolas Feuillatte, and if you have troubles pronouncing it, think about what your car needs. Your car needs fuel a lot. Nicolas Feuillatte. And that one's a true champagne, so it's made in Champagne, France. The big differences between the two, the Chandon has a lot more, the bubbles are slightly bigger. It has more Meyer lemon and apple flavors, whereas the Nicolas Feuillatte has smaller bubbles, so slightly smoother mouthfeel, as well as more toasty brioche flavors. So it still has the lemon and it still has some of the apple, but it's definitely more toasty brioche. Next, we're going to go slightly out of order compared to your notes, but we're going to start with the Santa Cristina Pinot Grigio coming from Italy. Pinot Grigio is light in body, light in color, easy drinking. It honestly doesn't have a whole ton of a lot going on, which the good news is if it doesn't have a whole ton going on, it pairs with everything, right? So anything on happy hour it's going to pair with. It's going to pair with almost every single fish dish we have. If a guest's asking for a recommendation to go with their steak, would I go Pinot Grigio? No. But if your guest wants Pinot Grigio and they want steak, heck yes, let's sell it to them. So really light, easy drinking, really great if somebody's sitting out on the patio and just hanging out with friends and is looking for a bottle. It doesn't need to have food with it to taste good. Next, we're going to talk about the Grey Wacky Sauvignon Blanc. That's coming from New Zealand. Definitely a higher acid wine. So we talked about that, squeezing a lemon onto food. This is that wine. So if your guest is looking for something higher acid, or they're looking to pair something with their fish and chips or their calamari or oysters, anything along those lines, you're going to want to go to the Grey Wacky because it's got that really great higher acidity. Still crisp, smooth, lots of citrusy notes to it. Next is going to be the Conundrum White Blend. It's a blend of multiple different grapes, including Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, blah, 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 lots of different grapes. And they actually change it every single year ever so slightly to change up the varietal. It's a really cool story where the wine came from. It was actually done by the Wagner family, who does Caymus and Meiomi, if you've ever heard of either of those. And over 25 years ago, at the end of a really long day, in the middle of harvest, they'd finished up. Chuck Wagner had some grapes left over. He had some juice left over. He's like, let's throw a little of this and a little of this and a little of this together. We'll see what happens. A while later, he pulls out the wine, goes to taste it, and he's like, oh my goodness, this is it. I'm going to make all of the dollars. This is the best wine I've ever had, I've ever made. This is great. What did we put in this? And he realized nobody ever wrote down exactly what it was. And so every year they try to recreate this special wine that's going to make them all of the dollars. And that is the Conundrum. And that's where the name for this wine came from, which is always a little fun story that you can tell your tables. The Conundrum does have a little bit of oakiness to it, a little bit of roundness. So you're definitely, when you get a chance to taste through these wines, you'll start to feel that difference on your palate between going from the Grey Wacky to the Conundrum. And then we're going to talk about the Riesling next, the Charles & Charles Riesling, coming from Yakima Valley in Washington. It is a Riesling. It does have some sweetness to it, but don't think sweet like Sutter Home Riesling. It's not that sweet. So it does have some sugar to it, but it's not immensely sweet. It's not Moscato sweet. It actually has a lot of really great limey flavors to it. So think more key lime pie is kind of the sweetness level to it. Really great acidity. It pairs really well with anything spicy because that sweetness kind of balances out spicy. That's why we have sweet and spicy stuff. After that is going to be the Chardonnays. Now we carry 3 Chardonnays by the glass. Grove Ridge is our house Chardonnay, and it's a nice house Chardonnay. It's not anything to write home about, but for the price point, it's a really nice house Chardonnay. It's definitely got Meyer lemon to it. It's got some apple notes to it because that's the varietal characteristic of Chardonnay. It does have a little bit of oak and a little bit of that buttery malolactic fermentation that we talked about earlier to it, but I definitely wouldn't call it an oaky, buttery Chardonnay. We reserve that for the Rodney Strong Barrel Select, which is our mid-tier Chardonnay. And that is absolutely our butter bomb. If you have a guest who says, I like buttery Chardonnays, we're going to go Rodney Strong all day long. Guests love it. It's definitely got this like movie theater butter popcorn, which sounds really funky, but it's really fun in a wine. Again, it's a very love-or-hate flavor, so you will find some guests really like it and some guests really don't. Most guests who don't like it don't order Chardonnay, though. Rodney Strong is easily our most popular Chardonnay. And then finally, we have our Raymond Reserve. And that's kind of the combination of the malolactic fermentation, that butteriness, as well as the oakiness, but on a much smoother, silkier style. Where Rodney Strong is like jumping up and down in a cheerleader outfit, telling you about how oaky and buttery it is. Raymond is just nice, smooth, it knows it has it, and it's definitely that next level up. So if you have a guest asking about a Chardonnay, you're going to talk about all 3. And I always talk about it as, fantastic, we have 3 Chardonnays. Rodney Strong, which is definitely our oaky, buttery Chardonnay. Raymond Chardonnay, which is our smooth and clean Chardonnay. And then Grove Ridge is our house. If a guest asks for more information on their house wine, you can give it to them. But typically a guest who's going to order a house is going to order a house, and that's great because it's still better than them ordering a Diet Coke. All right, and those are our white wines. Next up, we're going to talk about red wines. And again, we're going to go in a slightly different order than is on the paper, but we're going to go in order from lightest to heaviest to make it nice and easy for you. So first up is going to be the Castle Rock Pinot Noir. Definitely our lightest in body. Lots of cherry, cola, a little bit of that oak, which we talked about when we talked about varietal characteristics for Pinot. And then next to it is going to be the complicated Pinot Noir, which has a little bit more body, a little bit more oomph. Still a light to medium bodied wine, but in comparison to the 2, Castle Rock is going to be your lightest wine, and the complicated is going to be slightly heavier. So if you have a guest asking about Pinot, that's really the big defining feature between those 2. After that is the Conundrum. So we have the Conundrum white wine. We also have it in a red. And again, it's a blend. Very oaky, very jammy, lots of fruit in there. This is going to be your best choice for your typical Zin drinkers. We don't carry any sweet red wines, but this is going to be the closest in the extent that it has a lot of fruit, and again, it has that oakiness, which some people on their palates perceive as sweetness. So it's not sweet, but it's very, very fruity. And medium body as far as structure. Grapes in that one tend to be Syrah, Petit Syrah, Zinfandel, and then they throw a bunch of other stuff in there, here and there. But again, just think really fruity, fruit forward, easy drinking, medium bodied for the Conundrum. Next in body structure, we're definitely going towards your fuller bodied, and that's going to be the St. Francis Merlot. Merlot had a huge setback back in the 90s when a movie called Sideways came out, and it's been reeling from that ever since. But Merlot is a really great wine, especially when you have a table that has multiple different things on the table, right? Like if you have a little of this and a little of that, Merlot's a good balance for all of them. It is a little on the fuller body side, so just be careful if they have a really, really light fish, like a rockfish. I'd probably go more Pinot. But otherwise, Merlot is a kind of good spot to be. You're definitely going to feel those tannins on your palate. You're definitely going to start getting that dry flavor, that dry feeling where it feels like you're starting to like get wiped out on your palate. But it's still very fruit forward. It's got lots of blueberries to it and even a touch of like a bittersweet dark chocolate. Really nice. Again, Merlot went through this huge thing where it stopped being popular and it's just now starting to fight its way back. But I do encourage you to give it a shot because there's a reason why it's a classic. And then from there, we're going to talk about our Cabernet Sauvignons. Easily one of the most popular varietals. Typically our most popular varietals are the Chardonnays and the Cabernets. So we have 3 Cabernets as well. Our house is, once again, the Grove Ridge. And like the Chardonnay, it's a decent house. Is it anything to write home about? No. Is it going to get you what you want? Absolutely. It's got those heavier flavors. We're into that fuller bodied now. You're going to get tannin. You're going to get a lot of red fruit from it. You know, some cherries, some strawberry. And you're going to get that oak. Our next one is the Austerity. And the Austerity is the big one. If somebody's asking for the biggest wine by the glass, you're going to go for the Austerity. It has lots of tannin, lots of dryness to it. So definitely for the guests who like that flavor, you want to go with the Austerity. And then our final Cabernet Sauvignon is going to be the Rodney Strong Knights Valley, which is very smooth. It is full-bodied, but the tannins are much more integrated and smooth and fine. So they feel nice and silky on the palate, as opposed to the Austerity, which are a little bit more grippy. And your guests will have a preference to they like more grippy tannins versus they like smooth tannins. And it's a total personal preference. And the way that I like to tell the difference between the 3 Cabernets is I'm going to bring them out in front of me real quick. Okay. So you have your 3 Cabernets. Your Austerity, and I'm sorry, I'm going to make car references, and I don't know cars very well. But your Austerity is definitely your muscle car, right? These are your Chargers, your Mustangs. Think that, like, you hear them coming, they know they're there. This is your big guy. Your Rodney Strong, that's your Lamborghini, right? It's smooth, it's sleek, you know, it's everything you want. The Grove Ridge, that's your Camry. It gets you where you're going, and you would never trade it. You know, you want your Camry more than you want nothing. If I could afford to have the muscle car or the Lambo, would I? Absolutely. Am I going to turn down my Camry? Not a chance. And that's how I like to tell the difference between the 3 when you're thinking about them and talking about them to your guests. All right. So I'm going to show you how to do a perfect wine presentation for your guests. So your guest has ordered their bottle of wine. You've now retrieved it either from your bartender or from a manager. The first thing you're going to do is going to take it to the guest who ordered the wine, and you're going to present the bottle to them. So you're basically just going to hold the bottle up to your guest, and you're going to repeat what the bottle is. So this is our 2017 Raymond Chardonnay coming from Napa Valley. I always say vintage, labeling, and where it's from. That's the order I always say. That way I know I don't miss anything. But this is your guest's chance to confirm, like, yes, that's absolutely what I ordered. So now you're going to open the bottle. You want to keep the label facing the guest at all times. So if the label's facing the guest, you're going to hold it by the neck and pull out your trusty wine key. If you don't feel comfortable opening wine, talk to your bartenders. They always have wine that needs to get open, and it'll give you a chance to really open wine in front, to give you a chance to open multiple bottles. You're always going to want to cut underneath this second label. So you want to cut down here, not up here. I always make a cut across the back of the bottle, so you can kind of see it right here. And it'll make it nice and easy for you to pull the whole thing off. And you want to do that when you're doing it, it'll actually be facing you, so you'll be able to see everything that you're doing. And it'll come off in one nice, easy swoop. Trash always goes in your own pocket. It doesn't go on the table, it doesn't go in the wine bucket or anything like that. It goes in your pocket to take to a trash can. You want to do a quick little dab of the top, and now we're going to open the bottle. I always put the wine key in at an angle so that once you get a nice turn in, you're perpendicular and nice and easy. You're going to twist all the way in. Make sure you go all the way. If you only go halfway, you could break the cork. The lever comes down, and you want the top part of the lever to be on the lip of the bottle. I always hold it with my thumb because that's the easiest way for me to hold it. You're going to use your other hand to lift the cork as far as it'll go at that point, and then you're going to go to that second lever right here. Hold it with your thumb again, and continue up. Stop just before it comes out, and grab it with your hand. That way, if you yank it too hard, there's a chance wine will come spilling out. Not only does your guest lose out on some wine, but it's really embarrassing, and nobody wants that. So you're holding your bottle label still facing the guest. I always put the wine key in my hand here, nice and easy, and you're gonna take the cork off. The bottle should never touch the table until after you've done your first pour to everybody. You're gonna present the cork to the guest who ordered the bottle. He may or may not smell it and tell you everything smells great. It's just a thing people like to do. You're gonna wipe the bottle again, and now you're gonna pour to the host. Give them a good little splishy splash, right? They want to be able to taste it and tell if it's right. When the host confirms, yes, the bottle's perfect, fantastic. You're gonna pour to all of the ladies at the table, then the gentlemen. You're gonna end with the host, whether the host is male or female. Make sure you portion out the bottle. If you have 8 guests, you can't pour each guest a full glass because you will run out of wine halfway through. So you're gonna pour a little shorter, and you're just gonna need to be able to judge how much to pour. You'd rather pour a little short and have wine left in the bottle than not get to the host who ordered the bottle and have them not have any wine. Hi, we're gonna talk about cocktails and spirits, because again, I get to talk about the fun stuff. So our bar is a little unique. It's also really on trend with a lot of what's been happening in the past 5 or 6 years, in that these pre-prohibition style cocktails have been really coming to the forefront. It's been really focused on craft cocktails, fresh ingredients, and less artificial flavoring, and our bar is definitely in that trend and working on pushing forward into the forefront of that trend. So with that in mind, we're going to go through the packet, and I'm going to kind of go through it with you and give you the more lowdown on what's going on. So, things that you will not find in the Taps family is going to be pre-made cocktail mixers and sweeteners. So there's no sweet and sour behind that bar. There's no pina colada mix. There's no margarita mix. All of that is made individually each time by our bartenders by using fresh ingredients. You won't find any unnaturally colored spirits or additives. There's no flavored vodka, marshmallow, fluff, berry, acai, chocolate, all of those different styles of, we've all seen them of Pinnacle and Absolute. We don't carry those. We carry a couple very specific ones that are used for our signature cocktails, but otherwise it's lemon and orange vodka, and that's really about it as far as flavored vodkas. And both of those are craft made in California. They're not big, giant, overproduced, and they're made with fresh ingredients. Bottled citrus juices. We only use fresh juices that are squeezed either in-house or purchased fresh squeezed. So you won't find Rose's Lime. We've all seen those bottles of Rose's Lime juice. We don't carry those. We have fresh squeezed lime juice, which really changes the flavor because it doesn't have any of that artificial sweetener in it. We also don't carry any blenders or margarita machines, which always makes my bartenders super happy. So with that in mind, how does that affect our style of service? Well, with that, there are certain drinks that we can and can't make. Specifically, a lot of restaurants have their own signature cocktails, and each of us use our own ingredients to make our own signature cocktails. So if you have a guest specifically looking for a very specific drink from a different restaurant, we might have a hard time replicating it. We can get close, but if we don't have the ingredients, unfortunately, we can't do it. But you don't want to leave your guests by saying like, oh, we don't make that. Oh, we don't do that here. We're not snobby. We're in the hospitality industry. We're here to have fun with alcohol, right? So maybe I can't make exactly what it is they're looking for, but I can make them a very fruity drink with the style of spirit they want. So maybe they were looking for some super peachy drink that they had somewhere else. Well, okay. Does it have to be peach? You know, if we have fresh peaches, we can use peaches and make our drinks. Or we can make something along the same lines that'll make our guests happy. The goal is to always exhaust all of our efforts to make our guests happy. And we have a lot of different ways to do that. We use bitters. We use fresh ingredients. If we have it in the kitchen, we will put it into a cocktail. And that includes things like blueberries or lavender, jalapeno, cucumber. All of those flavors we can create into a cocktail by using those fresh ingredients as opposed to an artificially flavored spirit. Because we don't have blenders or margarita machines, we can't make a blended margarita or a blended pina colada. However, each of our locations have crushed ice. So while it's not exactly the same, it definitely gives you that textural feeling that a blender does. So if a guest is asking for a blended strawberry margarita with a sugar rim, we're going to make a margarita, we're going to muddle fresh strawberries into it, and we're going to put it over crushed ice with a sugar rim. And it's going to be an even more fresh take on maybe something that they've only ever had with artificial sweetener. And our guests tend to really enjoy that. All right. So always just make sure that you lean on your bar team for their advice in creating some cocktails that your guests may want that we might not have the exact ingredients for. As far as our Spirits 101, so we have a few things that are set in stone. A standard drink is 1.5 ounces of alcohol. A happy hour drink is 1.5 ounces of alcohol. Our happy hour is a true happy hour discount. You get the same vodka soda on happy hour as you would if you got it not on happy hour. You just get a true discount. Our standard wine pour is 6 ounces. Your bartender will pour it into a carafe for you, and you can just pour the carafe table side. If you're getting a second glass of the same wine, there's a button that you can hit that says refill only. They'll give you the carafe, and that way if somebody else is helping to run your drinks, they'll be able to not grab a glass for you. They'll know it's already on the table ready to go. All of our straight spirit cocktails. So any cocktail that doesn't have a soda or a juice in it, so think Old Fashioned, Manhattan, Negroni, Boulevardiers, those styles of drinks will by default be stirred and served with one of the large king cubes. If your guest wants it to be shaken and served up, totally great. We can do that. You just have to make sure you hit those modifiers on the POS. Otherwise, it's going to be stirred and served with a large cube. We do have, again, crushed ice available for guests who want something similar to a blended beverage. Garnishes. Garnishes should always be bright and pretty and fun, right? If the first thing you're theoretically getting at your table is your cocktail and you get this ugly piece of mint that's all like sad and wilty and a lemon and a lime that's brown and bruised, how does that make you feel about how your entire dining experience is going to be? Not great. So make sure when you're doing garnishes and when you're looking at the garnishes and garnishing your drinks that the garnishes are bright and fresh. If they're not, let your bartender know so we can get you fresh garnishes. Every cocktail has a garnish. And they're all listed with your cocktails. The garnish is going to be either a peel or a wheel of the corresponding juice in the drink. So if you're having a margarita has lime juice, you're going to get a lime wheel. A lemon drop has lemon juice, you're going to get a lemon peel. If it's up, it gets a peel. If it's on ice, it gets a wheel. Trust me, the more you do it, the easier that gets to remember. The only drinks that come with an actual wedge are going to be your single liquor drinks. So think Jack and Coke, vodka soda, gin and tonic, rum and diet, etc., etc. Those will come with a lime or lemon wedge. Because if our drinks are perfectly balanced, the first thing a guest does is squeeze their wedge in. Now your drink's off balance. Now, if a guest asks for it, are we going to give it to them? Absolutely. A guest wants their margarita with 5 lime wedges. We're going to give them their 5 lime wedges. We're here to make our guests happy. The default will be the lime wheel, but we're more than happy to get them whatever the guest wants. Let's see. We do not put a salt or sugar rim on our drinks by default. We have the technology, we have the capability, more than happy to do it. We're just not going to do it by default. You have to hit the button that is on your POS that says sugar rim or salt rim, and the bartenders will be more than happy to do it for you. As far as shots are not chilled or salted by default. So if your guest orders a tequila shot, make sure you ask, do you want that chilled and do you want salt? And again, we'll be more than happy to do that. If it's a holiday party and your guests are trying to order 30 tequila shots, we will chill and salt them if they really want them. But please know that you need to get a manager involved right away, because that is going to take a long time, and we want to make sure all of the guests are able to maintain, speed out of the well. So just make sure you're communicating that with the manager. All right. So now we're going to go through different types of spirits. Vodka. Vodka is your standard spirit. It can be made with just about anything, and the goal of vodka is to be clear and basically smell like nothing, taste like nothing, and just have that nice alcohol flavor. Obviously, different vodkas taste differently based on the different ingredients they used. And in a drink like a martini, the vodka choice is going to make a huge difference. Whereas the vodka in maybe a Bloody Mary, probably going to make a little bit less difference. There is a list for you with all of the major vodkas we carry across the company, and our well is Platinum 7X. But otherwise, we carry all of the major vodkas that you know of, that most guests know of. Gin. So gin is another clear spirit, made with herbs and spices, with the primary herb being juniper. It's a very distinct flavor, one of those love-or-hate flavors. Some people really enjoy gin, some people really don't, and that's fine. Again, we carry the majority of your standard gins. Our well for gin is Pinnacle. We're going to talk a little bit about vodka and gin martinis. We sell a lot of martinis, so knowing the specifics of our martinis is important. So our martinis are made with 2.5 ounces of either vodka or gin and a half ounce of dry vermouth. A half ounce of dry vermouth is a lot of vermouth. Some places don't use any vermouth at all. Some places do the fancy little, they're going to spritz the vermouth in there. Some do a rinse where they drop some vermouth in, swirl it in the glass, and dump it. Ours has half an ounce of vermouth, which again is a lot for a lot of guests. So you need to make sure your guests know that. We do use a decent amount of vermouth. Is that okay, or would you prefer me to cut down on the vermouth or remove the vermouth? If a guest asks for a dry martini, we're going to use half the amount of the vermouth, and extra dry is no vermouth. Don't waste your time sitting here in the POS typing in no vermouth. There's an extra dry button, one touch, extra dry, as opposed to sitting here and wasting all your time trying to type in no vermouth. By default, we're going to garnish with a lemon twist. We have olives. They're the fancy Italian Castelvetrano olives, which we're more than happy to give the guests if they'd like. We can also do blue cheese stuffed olives as well. By default, we are going to stir our martinis. We also do have onions if a guest wants a Gibson, which is a martini with cocktail onions. Doesn't get asked for a lot, but we do have it just in case. So, a guest orders a martini. you're going to have two different types of guests. You're going to have the guest who gives you all of the details of everything they want. I want a Tito's martini up with a twist, lightly dirty, extra dry. Great. Now I know everything I need to know. Then you're going to have the guest who goes, I want a martini. And you're like, great, you've given me no information whatsoever about what you want. So, would you like gin or vodka? Hit your upsell, right? So if they're saying vodka, fantastic. Tito's, Kettle One, Grey Goose, Belvedere. Get that upsell in. Fantastic. We're going to do a Belvedere martini. Our martinis are stirred and served up, garnished with a lemon twist, and do have vermouth. Is that okay, or was there a different way you like your martinis? Nice, quick, easy. Your guests will be able to tell you exactly how they like their martinis, and so everybody's happy. You only have to punch it in once, the bartender only has to make it once, and the guest gets exactly what they want. So just do make sure that we are talking about our specific martinis to our guests. All right. Bourbon. Definitely really popular right now. We carry a lot of the major brands. Our well is Old Forester. And then we also carry, depending on when you see this, we do carry a single barrel bourbon. We've used quite a few different ones, and it's a really cool project, so check in with your bartender to see what single barrel we're using right now. Our single barrel project, we pick out a specific barrel from the distillery that we use for our signature old fashions. We chose that barrel. It's our barrel. It's bottled specifically for us. We then take that barrel, it goes to the brewery, and the brewers are able to put beer in it for a barrel-aged beer down the line. So please make sure you check with your bartender to see what that bourbon is right now. And again, we do carry the majority of your most popular bourbons. For rye whiskeys, we carry Wild Turkey Rye as our well. And again, we carry the most popular rye whiskeys. Do we have every single rye ever? No, because there's thousands of them. But we carry your big ones, including Whistle Pig, as well as some of your top-end Whistle Pig, Boss Hogs, or 18 years. So there's a lot of really cool nuances to the bourbon and rye lists that change throughout the year based on allocations. Now, people ask, what's the difference between bourbon and rye? Well, bourbon is made with at least 51% corn, and rye is made with at least 51% rye. The big difference there is, as a base, corn is slightly sweeter than rye is. So when all else is equal, bourbon is a little fuller in body and a little bit sweeter, and rye is a little bit lighter in body and a little bit drier. Again, we're talking about the absence of sweetness when we talk about dry. Also, ryes tend to be a little bit more spicy. And by spicy, think black pepper spice, not jalapeno spice. If you've ever had rye bread, it tastes different than white bread. Think about that. Another major type of whiskey is going to be your Scotch. Scotches are made in Scotland. Multiple different types of Scotch. We carry a decent amount. The big ones that we don't carry Glenlivet at all of our locations, but the Macallan is the closest to that. Most of your guests who like Scotch tend to know what type of Scotch they like, but if you have questions, let your bartender know. You also have all of the descriptions in your packet. We've also put all of our Japanese whiskeys in with the Scotch whiskeys, because the gentleman who brought whiskey to Japan, learned in Scotland. So they definitely have the more nuances of those smokier, peatier flavors that Scotch do than they do the sweetness that bourbon does. So those are all mixed together. As far as Irish whiskey, we carry Jameson and Redbreast, which are really your two big ones. When people go for Irish whiskey, they tend to go for Jameson. There are going to be some other whiskeys that come and go. We do carry Crown Royal. We carry some other stuff. The whiskey selection does change occasionally based off of what we can and can't get and what's kind of cool and upcoming and new. Our next category is going to be rum, which is made from sugarcane, and there's a lot of different styles of rum. I'm going to go through a couple of them for you. The Flor de Cana is our well rum, and it's a white Silver rum, very standard. Think very similar to like Bacardi, which we also carry. The very first one on the list is Avua Cachaça. It's a Brazilian-style cane sugar rum made for caipirinhas. If you have a guest who's looking for like a rum and coke, I would steer them away from this one because it is a very different flavor profile. We carry Bacardi, Captain Morgan, Gosling's Black Seal. That's your equivalent to Myers. So if somebody's looking for a dark rum float, Gosling's Black Seal is the one that we use. And then the Rum Haven Coconut, that's an equivalent to Malibu. There are a few things that we carry that are a more craft or small batch than some of your big brand names. Rum Haven's one of them instead of Malibu. For brandy and cognac, brandy is a spirit distilled from wine grapes. So they basically make wine and then they distill it to make brandy. We don't sell a whole heck of a lot of brandy or cognac. Cognac is another one of those French things. If it's not made in Cognac, France, you can't call it cognac. But most people don't really pay that much attention to that. So those are all listed as well as what the signs mean for them for you. So if you're interested in that, please go through, read them, know what you have. But typically your guests will know exactly what it is that they want to order if they're ordering cognac. Agave spirits, that's your tequila and mezcal family. We do carry a decent amount of those, including añejos, reposados, extra añejos, so the whole kind of line we carry. The big one to know is the Casa Noble Crystal is the equivalent of Patron. So we don't have Patron, but we do have the Casa Noble Crystal, very similar. And then the Don Julio 1942, that's going to be your top shelf. Just make sure if a guest orders Don Julio, you're letting them know that it's the 1942 so that they don't get hit with a $25 margarita bill, not realizing when they thought they were ordering a silver. Okay? Liquors and cordials, you can totally go through those on your own. I'm going to point out a couple little ones that you might not have ever heard of, that you've heard of their equivalent to, and that's going to be the Kerrygold Irish Cream is your equivalent to Bailey's. So if you have a guest who's ordering Bailey's, we carry the Kerrygold Irish Cream. Again, it's just a smaller batch version. That's kind of the only one that you really need to know the difference for. Everything else is kind of similar, and your guests won't know too much of the difference between. Bitters. Bitters is a really cool flavoring agent. It allows you to punch a lot of flavor into a cocktail without a lot of actual liquid. So you can keep your drink nice and compact and really flavorful without having to sit here and drown it down with a bunch of different juices or sodas or this or that. So we use a lot of bitters to make a lot of our flavorings. And then after this, we're going to pass it off to Josh, who's going to show you all of our cocktails, and he's going to make those so you can see all of our signature cocktails.